Conversation edition. I've been looking forward to this evening after spending a wonderful week, or a weekend, I should say, in Lancaster. Mark Spiridigliosi, am I saying that right? Lancaster?
Lancaster.
Lancaster. The rest of the world calls it Lancaster, but in Lancaster, they call it Lancaster. And spent a wonderful weekend there, saw Mark, spent some time with him, gave a talk, went to a veterans breakfast in Lancaster, started planning out one that we're going to have there, learned some great local history, that's actually national history, and had some great conversations. And I've been looking forward to getting together tonight and having open conversation. I hope you all are doing okay. I'm looking around here and seeing, hi, Ida May, good to see you. Jim Jameson, good to see you. Leo West, who just sent me a great PowerPoint presentation on the history of Russia that we're looking to incorporate into a program somewhere down the line. Michael, good to see you. Rick Arisman, Ben Wright, Lauren Moran. Is that your daughter's name, Bill? I see Connie, very good. Julia Parsons. Hey, I want to tell everybody, Julia is going to Washington, D.C. for Memorial Day. And people should know how to tune in for that. I am going to share my screen here so that people can, let's see, here it is. It's the PBS Memorial Day program that many people know from previous years. They've been doing it for years and years and years. It's Sunday, May 29th. It'll be on PBS and also streaming at pbs.org at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern. And Julia, I think you're going to, Julia, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, what role are you going to play here? I think you're not speaking, but aren't they kind of covering you and your service?
As far as, can you hear me?
Yes.
As far as I can see, and from what we've heard, we just finally got our itinerary yesterday. I don't know why they've been so slow. They talked about security, and I thought it's enough. I worry about my age and and the COVID, and now I've got to worry about security. Well, anyway, I think they're going to have a lot of World War II women, not a lot, but probably half a dozen of us. And they're going to do like the Steelers did, they're going to do a video. And then I don't know whether we stand up and wave or I don't know what happens then. I'll find out. But anyway, I don't talk, so that's it. I just sit on the stage along with all the other people and wait and see what happens, I guess.
That's kind of nice. So you get honored. You don't have to do too much work. You just show up. I'll have to give you a placard to hold up that says veteransbreakfastclub.org.
Yes, that would be a good idea.
Yeah,
yes.
that's
sounds like a good idea.
And that's on Sunday night. It's not a Memorial Day, correct? It's on Sunday night at 8.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know why they're doing that, but they are. So that's it.
And PBS has been doing that. And then also like a Capitol 4th for the 4th of July every year for years and years and years. So, and that's always a huge production.
I think she said they started this in 1987, something like that. And they've done it every year since. But the last couple of years have been on Zoom. Right. So this is going to be open again, but only families of the people who are on stage are in the audience. It has to be a ticket. You can't go and sit on the Capitol grounds like you used to be able to.
So it's not wide open. Okay.
It's not open at all. So that was that.
Rick, you have a question? You put it in the chat. You want to ask it?
Yeah, in the past, the veterans have always sat in the audience
watching the concert. I don't know how that'll be this year, but I wondered what else Julia was going to be doing that day.
Oh, that's all. I hope to get around and see some of the memorials. They want us there Friday night.
Oh,
So we'll be there 2 full days, and part of Monday and part of Friday. I
great.
want to see the memorials that I haven't seen yet. So I understand they broke ground for the new Medal of Honor memorial, something like that. Or anyway, they just broke ground yesterday, I guess it was.
For a Medal of Honor memorial.
That's
Huh.
that's in Texas.
The museum.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right.
But did they break ground on something? I know that on July 27th, they're unveiling the remembrance wall for the Korean War Memorial.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
should write these things down, but I didn't. So
Yeah.
I'm only half knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Get your whiteboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's right. Okay. I'm looking around. I see Brad Washabaugh. Good to see you, Brad. Jackmorrow. How are you, Jack? Another World War II veteran. Good to see you. I have a bunch of questions, discussion topics here. I wanted to throw out. First, let me go through. Hey, Henry Shepke. Hey, Henry. Good to see you, buddy. It's so good to see you. It's been a while. How have you been? Let me ask Henry first of all, because I haven't talked to you in a while. How have you been? You must be in your last couple weeks of school, I guess.
Yeah, we have like 11 more days left.
Not that you're counting, but 11 more days. And do you have anything planned for the summer that's special?
Not really. Well, I'm going to Toronto on a road trip. So hopefully.
And for what? For what purpose?
For vacation, see Niagara Falls. So
Nice. Fantastic. Maybe you'll see Scott Masters there.
yeah, maybe.
Toronto. Have you ever been to Toronto, Henry?
No, I've never been to Canada before. So
I mean, I've been there a few times and love it. Love it. First of all, it's very big. Without saying, it's a very big city. And second, it's so international. I think I didn't realize the first time I went there what an international city it is. I mean, you hear a lot of different languages, seeing a lot of different kinds of faces. The restaurants are really diverse. It's just a super multicultural city. And Scott, I don't know if you lived there long enough to see that develop over the decades.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been here all my life in some way, shape, or form, going back to the early 70s, and it has changed a ton in all the years I've been living here.
It's changed a ton.
Yeah.
It's gotten bigger and much more diverse.
Yeah, absolutely, on both counts. And if you like eating, you can find a restaurant with food of any cultural group here. It's a fantastic place to explore.
Do you know what I did once, Scott, is my family and we got bikes and we rode around that island out in the lake. What's it called?
Center Island.
Is it called Center Island? I thought it had a more exciting name. Okay. But boy, and there's a little like airport actually on the island. That was really, really cool. That was just a wonderful place to spend a day and explore.
Yeah, well, Henry, you'll have to let me know when you're here. Maybe I can take you to the Sunnybrook Veterans Home. That's where they have about 500 World War II veterans. Lots of signatures for you.
that would be awesome.
Sunnybrook Veterans Home. Wow, we should do a VBC trip there. Man, Henry, you play baseball, so you'll be playing through much of the summer.
Yeah, I play baseball for Verona.
And
It's a
you play catcher.
Yeah, I play catcher.
That was my position. And when I was in Little League Baseball, I loved it. Why do you like it?
I don't know. It's just fun to catch the ball every play and throw it around.
That's it.
catch people that are stealing.
Yep. Yeah, I think I might have done that once. I caught a really slow stealer. But I liked it because like playing in the outfield was kind of boring. You know, you
Yeah.
kind of stand around waiting for the ball to get hit to you. Catcher, at least you're like active and doing something the whole time. That's why I liked it. Okay.
Yeah, you see a lot of action.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Henry. Thanks for joining us this evening. I do want to, before we go further with the conversation, I want to make a few announcements. Number one, we created a survey, a 3-question survey about our programs. We included it in our email VBC bulletin today and are encouraging people to take it. I'll encourage people to take it this evening here if you'd like. It'll take just a minute. It's 3 questions. It will help us to, several people have answered it already, and it's already been very helpful to me to understand kind of what works with our online programs, what we could improve. I just put the link here in the chat on the Zoom side. I'll do it on the Facebook side. So please do. It's just, what do you think of the latest program? Did you like it? What did you like it or not like? How could we improve? Pretty simple. If you could do that, that'd be wonderful. We have sponsors, of course, D&D Auto Salvage. Just heard from them again. They are re-upping through the 3rd quarter. We're very grateful to them for their support. They've been a long time supporter. They're coming to some of our in-person events. And Mark Spiridigliosi and I had this conversation over the weekend. I've referred a couple times to D&D Auto Salvage as a what, Mark?
I believe you called it a junkyard, Todd, and it has connotations to it that I'm going to guess you could probably explain far better than I. We don't have junkyards; we have salvage yards in Lancaster.
So yeah, Tony Lancaster, there are Lancaster, there are salvage yards. Yeah, Mark said, in his very diplomatic, gentle way, he said, Todd, you might want to go easy on the junkyard talk when you're talking about D&D. You don't want to, appear to be denigrating your sponsor. And I thought that was a good point. But what I thought was like, it started out as a junkyard. And when it started out 50 years ago, that was probably how people referred to it. That's probably how they refer to themselves. And I think it's kind of remarkable that what we used to call junkyards, we've now ennobled or elevated for good reason to, a salvage yard, a salvage facility, even a metal recycling facility. It's kind of like we've recognized what old is new again, like the value of reusing and recycling, which is really what salvage yards do, and metal recycling is what D&D Auto Salvage does. It has 2 very large state-of-the-art facilities. I think you can't call them a junkyard because of how advanced they are. And they, do deal with customers, large and small individuals. You can get quotes or find out more information at dndautosalvage.com. That's dndautosalvage.com. Yes, Greg Yost, I'm looking at the chat here. In the military tradition, okay, why do they call it in the military tradition a boneyard? I think I've only heard the term boneyard used with reference to airplanes.
That's all I've heard it referred to as well. Yes. And they keep them in the desert and they try to keep the spare parts. I mean, it's a ready supply of spare parts. And I guess in a real serious emergency, they could probably spruce up the planes and get them flying again.
Right. Do they do the same thing with tanks and other big equipment?
I don't know. Some of the other people seem to be waving their heads, shaking their heads yes or no. So let them answer.
Ships are, Rick Arisman, ships are dry dock, maybe? Dry dock, is that where they put ships?
Hey, Todd,
Yes.
when I was in Northern I Corps in Vietnam, all the combat lost tanks were put in what was called the cannibalization yard. And what you could do is, like I did one time, I took my tank down with my tank crew. I spiffed up my tank with, stripping pieces of track and road wheels and fenders and stuff off of tanks that have been combat lost. and they called it the cannibalization point, because you could go in there like a cannibal and take what you needed. You know, I remember spending almost a whole day with my tank crew, and we got my tank up to numero uno shape.
And that's what salvage yards are all about, right? That's
Yeah.
where you go. Brad Washerbaugh.
Yeah, unmuting here, Todd. We've got to get a video of that machine in action, that yellow piece of machine that destroys or picks up or whatever it does to a car. I mean, that would be fantastic. And let me look at the crowd real quick. Maybe we could get like paint Baltimore Ravens on it, you know, and have it demolished right in front of our eyes. You know.
Crush a Baltimore Ravens car. I went up to where was I was going somewhere, and I passed D&D Auto. I mean, I could see it, D&D Auto Salvage, and I thought, should I stop there and stop in and say hello and say, like, you guys are sponsors? And I didn't do it. I felt like I didn't have the time, but I was going up to Cabot, PA. I was giving a talk in Cabot, PA, and I didn't stop that. But I've determined that I think I'm going to pay a visit. So maybe I could take that video, Brad.
Yeah, we had when I was on recruiting duty, we had a tank reserve unit nearby, and they would advertise to the public, come watch a tank jump a car. And, you know, the tank would build up a bit of steam, and they'd have a car parked out there. And of course, it never jumped the car, just ran it over and smashed it to the pleasure of the crowd. And that's how they.
Where was this done?
This is in when I was on recruiting duty in Albany, New York. There was a tank reserve unit that did that just to you know, draw in interest and you know, see a tank jump a car. It never happened, but the car was flattened like a pancake. It was
There's another VBC trip idea.
It was a crowd pleaser.
Do they do that anymore?
I don't know. It's probably, you know, nah, who knows. But
Larry Kilmeyer, you're absolutely right. Ships get mothballed. They get mothballed. Rick.
Yeah, Larry and Greg are correct. However, they're mothballed for future potential use. There's a bunch in the James River in Virginia and also at Pearl Harbor. But if they're not, the two LSTs that I was aboard were transferred to Spain and Italy. And if not that, they get sunk as an artificial reef.
But what if you want to save the ship for future use, possible use?
Well, that's a mothball.
That's mothball. And Michael, you're absolutely right. It's not, dry dock is for repair.
Right.
Dry dock is not for storage. You mothball a ship, you put an airplane in a boneyard, and then with tanks, you put them in the cannibalization yard or something like that. Okay. We've got that. We've got that settled a bit. Our other sponsor, of course, is Tobacco Free Adagio Health, and they encourage, they try to prevent and decrease smoking and tobacco use here in the US. They do that by advocating for policies that discourage tobacco use. They do it by educating the public about tobacco use, and they do it by counseling and helping people to quit. And the quit line is popular, 1-800-QUIT-NOW, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. You can connect to a counselor that will help counsel you to quit tobacco use. And you can certainly find out more. There are tons of resources on their website, tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. That's tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And I also want to let people know that our next magazine is at the printer. It is printed up, and it should be hitting mailboxes. Boy, I'm hoping that it hits mailboxes by the end of next week. We send this out free of charge. If you don't get one in the mail, it's because we don't have your address. Also, I ordered a lot of these, thousands of these to be distributed. Now that a lot of the pandemic restrictions have been lifted, people are out and about much more, and it's easier to get these out in stores and at the VA and in legions and libraries. So if you have people that you can distribute this to, would love to get more than one copy in your hands. I'd be happy to mail out, 10 or 50 copies to you if you'd like. Just let me know, and you can contact me on my email, todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. That's todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. And you can see that the cover story is the story of Michael Blassie, who was the Vietnam service person member in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier before his identity was officially discovered and he was removed. And it's that whole story. It's quite a dramatic one and quite a shameful one in certain respects. And it's Pete Mecca wrote a wonderful review of the case, and we published it here in our next magazine. We also have a very cool article on the ground war in Ukraine, and another one on the Route Irish, which is the world's most dangerous highway, and then a feature on our board of directors and other things. So really, it's a good issue. Scuttlebutt new this week today. It's Ryan and Sean having a great conversation about weird military news of the weird. Mr. Rogers as a Marine sniper, for example. Not true, but good story. Also, tomorrow night, we have a Greatest Generation live program, and we are bringing on the National Medal of Honor Museum. The ground is broken for it. I believe it's set to open next year and late next year. And we're also having family members and the biographer of John Red Morgan. Now, this guy, what a story. His memorabilia and a lot of his medals and a lot of his stuff is going to be at the museum, and he's going to be one of the featured story, of course. Red Morgan was the only Medal of Honor recipient to have been a POW after he received the Medal of Honor. He was somebody who broke his back in an oil fields in Texas before the war. The Army would not take him. He was classified as 4F. So he traveled to Canada, flew with the Canadian Royal Air Force, then somehow transferred back into the Army Air Corps, started flying missions, had this bizarre mission in July 1943 that is dramatized in the movie 12 O'Clock High, played by the Red Morgan character in 12 O'Clock High is Jesse Bishop. And it was this bizarre episode where his B-17 gets attacked, the oxygen's knocked out, all these controls are knocked out, and I shouldn't laugh about this. The pilot, Red Morgan's the co-pilot in this B-17. The pilot gets hit in the head with a machine gun shell. Doesn't kill him, but it makes him kind of crazy. And the pilot started flying very erratically. And so Red Morgan jumped in to take over the controls, and the pilot started fighting Red. For 2 hours, they battled over control of the plane, and the plane is all shot up. It can barely fly, no oxygen. Most of the other crew members are disabled. They're wounded themselves. He fights off the pilot and for 2 hours flies the plane. I shouldn't laugh, but I've never quite heard of a case like this. Lands the plane and then continues to fly missions after that. So we're going to be discussing that, the National Medal of Honor Museum tomorrow night, the story of Red Morgan tomorrow night. I hope you can join us. And then we have an in-person event in Allison Park here in Pittsburgh on the next morning, on Wednesday morning. We have a nice turnout for it so far. It should be a lot of fun. Please do join us if you can. Would love to have you. A week from tonight will be Memorial Day, and we decided I think we did not do a Memorial Day program in the evening last year, but we decided to do one this year. And we're going to have on the family of Vietnam POW Bob Sawhill. Might get another Vietnam POW on the program also. This is a family I met in March at Soldiers and Sailors for the Hall of Valor induction ceremony. I heard the story of Bob Sawhill, who passed away about 10 years ago. Met his family members, and I was very much inspired by his story. and I asked the family members if they would come on to talk about their loved one, and they said they would. So we're going to do that a week from tonight. So please do join us if you can. I'll send out a reminder about it, of course. Okay, I think that pretty much covers the major announcements I wanted to make. Let's see what we have here. Henry, please, could you share the story about this incredible autograph you got recently?
Yeah, so I got a signed book from Kazuo Dachi, and he was a kamikaze pilot. He went on, I think, 7 or 8 missions, but never was able to complete his mission because of weather, malfunction. He was flying an outdated Zero, and many other issues. But yeah, he was a kamikaze pilot.
So he was a kamikaze pilot who survived.
Yeah, he survived, and he wrote a book about it, which you can get on Amazon.
And the book is Memoirs of a Kamikaze. And here I'm going to share the link to, we always do Amazon. Let's do Barnes and Noble this time. I mean, what a fascinating story. And do you see, I haven't read the book and I don't know his story, but I've heard of it. And my understanding is that he felt deep, deep shame for not having completed these kamikaze missions.
Yeah.
And
he felt a lot of shame and then later after the war, remorse.
Yeah, remorse, just remarkable. And he's still alive, and he sent an autograph.
Yeah, he's still alive. I met his friend who helped translate it to English on Zoom. He lives in Japan.
Oh, how interesting. Oh my gosh. And I'll share a more recent photograph of him. There's been quite a bit written about him. I think that memoir has been, well reviewed. And here's a more recent picture of him from the Japan Times. Here we go. Oh, and you get to see this nice ad. I never dreamed that one day I'd become a grumpy old man, but here I am killing it. That, Bob Mizwa, I'm going to get you one of those. How about that? But here he is today. And boy, wouldn't it be great to get him on the program, Henry? Oh.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Oh man. Okay. You've just given me a mission. Thank you, Henry, for that. So neat. All right. Well, let me ask, I'm scrolling through the chat here, and does anybody have something they want to share or talk about? Oh, yes, Carol Popchalk.
Yes. Quickie question for Julia. And then I just wanted to share some reflections on the interview with Gunter Nisch. It really affected me, and it started me thinking about some genealogy research and family history research that my brother-in-law and sister-in-law were doing. And I have a couple of interesting stories to share with you about the post-traumatic stress syndrome of having been under Russian occupation. But first I wanted to ask Julia, did you ever do the interview with the Russian military officer that you were debating about? You need to unmute, Julia.
She is unmuted. I think, Julia, it's the that earphone issue again. We can't hear you. I could tell you, Carol, that she decided not to do it.
I'm proud of you.
We can't hear you, Julia. I'm sorry. I think it's the earphone issue again. And I can't remember. I can never remember because I'm not on your end. Oh, there you are. I think you're good now. No, you're not. That's so bizarre.
If there's anyone who shouldn't be silenced, it's Julia.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Well, let's let Julia work on that.
Okay.
And take her
The-
time. Okay, go ahead, Carol.
The anecdotes I wanted to share. My sister-in-law is Polish, and she has done decades of research on her family history because she found a treasure trove of letters written in Polish that a lot of her aunts and uncles and her father had been exchanging with relatives back in Poland for many, many years. So she figured there's a start for tracking down, are any of these people still around, or any of them, still alive, and what could we learn from them? So pre-COVID, she and my brother-in-law made, I think, 2 major trips to Eastern Europe to do research on her Polish ancestors and on my husband's German ancestors. So 2 separate stories come out of this. On the Polish side, they had tracked down a relative that they knew had been receiving the letters, or her family had been receiving the letters. And I guess she would have been a young girl at the time. And this would have been pre-World War II through the war years and everything. They had a lot of trouble finding her because, where she lived, the territory had been occupied by Germans, it had been occupied by Russians. It went back and forth so many times, and every single time it was trampled, and whole sections that they were trying to find and addresses they were trying to find were obliterated. But they finally tracked down this little cottage with the picket fence and the gate. And in her true, studious fashion, my sister-in-law had a clipboard with all of the questions and papers that she had brought along. So they approached this house and they came to the gate, and there was an old woman sitting on the porch. And she was very fearful of them, very fearful of them. My brother and sister-in-law had translators with them, and they were trying to communicate. We just want to ask you about our family. What they found out was that this woman saw the clipboard and assumed that they were there to do research about, did she really own her property?
Yep.
And they found that this was a common problem in her neck of the woods.
Yep.
That there was still I guess that would have been 2017 or 2018, property disputes that dated back to the Russian and German various occupations. But here's the happy ending to that story. She was very reluctant to even let them in the gate. My sister-in-law held up a picture that she believed her relatives had sent to this woman of them at their certain age in the 1930s. And the woman went into the house, disappeared. They thought, well, that's it. We might as well go. She came out holding the exact same picture. And from that point, she saw the picture and then knew, oh, these people are not a threat to me. These are friends. Right. And they were able to have a conversation with her and, get more information. But that fear, and my brother-in-law was just stunned by it. He said, that fear is palpable and it is still there. There's that fear that at any moment an invading army could come through and, wipe you out. The other thing that crossed my mind was on the Popchak side of the family, actually on my mother-in-law's side, the Shafranik side, her dad was born in, we always heard he was German. And it wasn't until Jeff started digging deeper and deeper, they found out that granddad was actually born in the section of Poland that kept changing hands between Poland and Germany and God knows who else. And at the time that he was born, it was in German hands. So he had a German birth certificate. So he's been tracking down the German side of the relationships. And they found a cemetery. A researcher over there helped them find a cemetery where there might be some family graves. There were not big gravestones there. And Jeff wanted, for a picture purpose, to mark where the family graves were. So he had little German flags, the kind that you get in the paper stores and stuff. And he marked the family graves with these German flags. And an official that was there told them they had to take those away. They couldn't, put German flags there. And they got the picture and moved on with their flags, and were confronted by another person that was at the cemetery who came over to them and sort of whispered to them, "Thank you for honoring your German relatives. We want to do this all the time, and we're not allowed. It takes an outsider to come in who doesn't know any better." And that's the only time we would see a German flag in our cemetery. And I mean, I know all about, the denazification rules that happened after World War II, but it just shows again at the human level how people get caught up in some of this stuff, and how it can really tear at you emotionally. And for some people, generations later, they're still not recovered. They're still carrying the scars. And I think Gunter's story that he survived and has, half the positive attitude that he does is a miracle.
Yes, I agree. And I do think, after years of working with veterans and really reflecting on it and reading up on it, I do think that the trauma and the recovery from trauma is something that is not only carried through decades of an individual's life, but is also passed down through families indirectly. I've just seen it too many times.
Yeah.
And I mean, the trauma of, so in other words, what I'm saying is, not only is the trauma of World War II still with us, the trauma of World War I
Yes.
is still with us. And
Yes.
it's still with us in people like me who don't even know that they've been shaped by that trauma, but we have. We really, really have. Julia, I think you're unmuted now. Oh, we heard you yell at your cat, and I figured you were unmuted. Darn it, somehow we got screwed up again. Let's try that. You could work on it. I'm sorry about that.
Get the cat back.
Yeah, get the and Carol, about that, and I don't want to go on too much about it, but I was about the issue of property ownership and title ownership. I think it's hard for us in the United States, maybe at least in the north of the United States, to understand the impact of total war on a population and on a landscape. I mean, World War II and certainly other wars since obliterated cities, and I mean obliterated cities, so that in the pre-GPS days, there's no way you could survey and find out who owned what. I was recently watching a series that I don't really recommend on Netflix called The Defeated, and I was interested in it because it took place in 1946 in Berlin, and it features the story of a Brooklyn cop who goes to Berlin in 1946 to advise the local Berlin police force there, and he gets caught up in this mystery. And it's it's a good premise, but I think it's really successful in the first few minutes of the series. The first few minutes is they show a newsreel of the end of World War II, how Germany is liberated and how the German people are happy to be out from under Hitler's yoke. And then you hear a deep foreboding bass, and the camera rises to show a city that is just rubble. I mean, this is a city that had no running water, hardly any electricity, no government, very skeletal police force, real anarchy and desperate poverty. 1/3 of the city didn't have anywhere to live, and it just very quietly shows these scenes of a city that's utterly devastated, to the point where there's no work. People spend their days combing through rubble, trying to find anything that they can to barter or sell. The Russian Red Army has carted away almost everything of value. And the hero of the story is this cop here on the right. He's trying to track somebody down, and he stops one of these women who's going through the rubble, and he has this map, and he says, "I'm looking for this address." And she said, "Oh yeah, it's over that way." And she said, but that map isn't going to help you because there are no streets left over there. And I thought that was like such a good way, because I've heard that. I've heard just that kind of description. Manila in the Philippines. I mean, no, there were no streets. There were, I don't know how people survived, and I guess people didn't survive, but I know I'm going on and on about that, but that's absolutely, Carol. And you can imagine, with millions of people around the world displaced from that war, it must have been chaos in Europe in 1945 and 1946, chaos in parts of China and Philippines. I don't know. How did we ever recover? Maybe we never have.
I don't think trust has recovered. And I think that's the lesson I got from thinking deeper about Gunter's story and other anecdotes that have been shared with me from the family. And even the fact that, it took him a long time to even tell his wife his story, that she didn't know for so long. There's a trust issue there too. So there are scars of war that are definitely invisible.
Yeah.
That would be my final comment.
Yep. They're invisible, but they're here. They're present. And they're with us. Absolutely. Yep. Julia, how are we doing with your microphone?
I don't know. Are we in?
Yay!
We
Talk
got
fast,
you.
Julia.
I'll not move for the rest of the evening. I think I probably need new earphones, that whole cord thing. I think it's the plug into the iPad that isn't.
That's what I've heard, is that there's an issue there. Now, you were scheduled to be on a program in Moscow for Victory Day, which is May 9th. And you decided not to participate.
Well, part of it was your problem, not problem. You talked about, well, yes, and you talked about the things that they did that were good. And I was really impressed by that, because I don't think I ever knew all that. But the further I delved into that, and I got my book out and really studied back in, and I thought, plus I got a message saying, would I talk about what they did in World War II to help win it? And I thought, well, that's fair. And then I thought, is there an ulterior motive there? So I decided I'd better not.
Yeah.
I was afraid I'd say something unimpressive or too impressive. I don't know what.
Yeah, or too impressive. In other words, this was a momentous Victory Day on May 9th in Russia because of the war in Ukraine. And it was clear that Vladimir Putin was going to use Victory Day as some part of, the larger propaganda effort to support the special military operation in Ukraine. And I think as the date approached, you thought more and more about how you didn't quite want to be used in any way that would help support the war in Ukraine.
Yes, I could have talked about my service, but I did that last year with them.
Yeah.
But they didn't ask for that.
They asked you to talk about the Soviet Union's role in World War II.
Yeah.
And you were like, what the heck do I have to say about that? I mean, that story better than I do. It's like they wanted an American to acknowledge.
Well, I knew they were in there, but I had no idea that they took care of 80% of the German army. That was just an amazing statistic to me. And if all that 80% had been not tied up with Russia or with the Nazis, they would have been all over the Allies, and I don't think we would have even won World War II. But I hate to ever say that, so I say it.
Yeah, no, I don't think we ever would have won. Ben, right? How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Along with what you were just discussing with Julia, in your absence, I emceed a VBC breakfast at in Moon Township a few years back, and a friend of Marshall Gardens was there, who was there weren't very many two-place F-105 Thunder Chiefs bombing North Vietnam during the Vietnam War. But this man was an electronic warfare officer that was flying with them. And after the war, he agreed to go to a thing with the Soviets and talk. And he just really regretted having to do it because they turned it all around, because they were talking about, because the Soviets were there as advisors with the North Vietnamese and were directly involved in shooting down U.S. aircraft, and which resulted in a lot of people in the Hanoi Hilton. And, they gave him this, it's great. And, we want to work being allies and all that sort of thing. And he had great regrets from having done it.
From having participated in it. And it just that sense, you don't want to be used. You don't want to be exploited. With the Veterans Breakfast Club, Brad Washaball and I have talked about this quite a bit. One of our values at the Veterans Breakfast Club is fidelity to the story, fidelity to the veteran story. And what you don't want to ever have, I think, is for a veteran to be exploited and have their service be used to promote something else. Especially something like that. So, yeah.
Well, Nick said he felt the same way, but he went to the conference himself. He got on Zoom and joined them, and he said it wasn't bad this year. It was quite good.
Okay.
So then I felt badly that I hadn't followed through with but it was too late then.
You can always do it next year.
I doubt they'll ask me again.
Yeah. Persona non grata. Greg Yost.
Yes. Since this is open conversation, I actually had a question that I was going to ask of the audience here. And it's a curious question that I have, and it's sort of related to some of this Soviet World War II stuff in Ukraine. And the link is the Cold War, the NATO Warsaw Pact years. And this is a question that I want to ask the audience. But I think you know me well enough to know that it takes me a while to ask questions. But I'll tell you the direction that I'm going. The direction is non-comms, non-commissioned officers. Okay, so keep this in mind as I tell my long story. 15 years ago, I was at a Thanksgiving party with a bunch of friends of mine, and one of the friends had a cousin up who had been in the Army, and he had been detailed to the NSA. And during the Cold War, he was listening in on, intercepted communications across the border there. And I said, you can't tell me anything, but what do you think? How would the war have gone? And he said, well, talked about a bunch of things. And he said, one of the weaknesses, they had a lot of weaknesses that we maybe, later on sort of started to exploit. But one of them is that the Soviet Army apparently had no non-comms. The whole structure of the Soviet Army did not have a sort of, 14-year veteran, what we would say E7s or E8s or something like that, who knew how to fix helicopters or get supplies going or something. They had no permanent rank of non-comm. And I find that a very interesting thing. And, armies and other organizations tend to be conservative. And one assumes that the Russian army today is very much like the Soviet army in 1985. And I wonder if this whole Ukraine thing is at least not in part explained by the absence of non-comms who just had warehouses stocked and, knew how to get things done in that very elementary logistical sense. I know you had a program on logistics before about Ukraine, and does anyone know, A, did the Soviets not really have the sense of non-comms that we have, and B, might that explain something of what's going on today? So.
What a great question, Greg, and not at all verbose. Jeff Witherell, I know that you are so on this issue.
Yeah, I think I've said this before. I worked NSA. I worked against the Russians in Germany, and that for 3 years with the 3rd Infantry. I was in signal intelligence. We were collecting on the enemy. I called him the enemy. Mm-hmm. But we and I said this before. I said the Russians are nothing but a bunch of vodka drinking thugs. You're right now. I said you can see it in Ukraine. I said when I saw those clowns, coming down one main avenue of approach, and they got stuck. I says, these clowns don't know how to do an offensive operation. They don't know how to do multi avenues of approach. I said they don't know how to do combined arms like we do. How do you synchronize across all the services? These guys have officers and privates. And if you talk to a Russian emigre, which I've talked to in our country here that have become citizens or on the way to be citizens, they said, you don't even go near the Russian army. He says they're either in jail or they're in the army. And he says, and they use their army to harvest potatoes and pick up trash along the roads and things like that, stuff that we would never think of using our soldiers for. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't changed. I mean, the Russian army, like I say, when we were in Germany for 3 years with the 3rd Infantry, I said we were going to clean their clock. We had no fear at all of the Russians. We worried about chemical warfare because they had like every third round was a chemical round, but we were not worried about their tanks. They had a lot of artillery. They had a lot of air defense, but in terms of crews and that, our crews were so much better than theirs. We could take out 10 of their tanks before we'd lose one. And that's just the way it was. And I think it's the way it is when you see it in the Ukraine. I had no surprise when they were getting their clocks cleaned by the Ukrainians.
Jeff, I have to say, I've known you for a couple years now, mostly on Zoom. I met you once. I remember meeting you here on Zoom and one of our Wednesday morning programs. You talked about that in 2020, about how, you understood how weak the Red Army was in Europe. And I have to say, I was a little skeptical of what you had to say. I thought, not that I didn't think it was true, but I thought, well, that's your point of view. That's your experience. Maybe there's a little bit of, American chauvinism there. Oh my gosh, were you right? I mean, everything I've read about the war in Ukraine, it rang so perfectly consistent with what you had to say about what you observed in the 1980s. And absolutely, Greg, one of those things, at least I've read about, has been this enormous gap between the officers who are making decisions, and often it's a geographical distance, hundreds of miles from each other, and the enlisted people who are very low on the totem pole, who don't have decision-making power, who are trying to execute these orders that can't really be executed.
Yeah, my neighbor right across my pipe stem here, he worked Air Force nukes and everything, and he was involved in all the treaty work and things like that with the Russians and everybody. And they had a demonstration to the Russians out in Wyoming, just showing them how we control our nukes in terms of making sure we don't pop off one surreptitiously or by accident. And at the end of the exercise, the officer, he addressed everybody, the American forces, and he said, great operation, great training exercise and everything. Okay, Sergeant Major, take charge and get this place cleaned up and everything, get everything back to garrison. And the Russian general who was there, he said, I can't believe you just turned that over to a sergeant, and he goes, why wouldn't I do that? He goes, if you do that in the Russian army, they'll steal you blind. He says, he said, they'll take their own equipment and pilfer it. Wow. And he said, so that's the way it is. He says that they scrape and connive and whatever they can get away with. And I always said that if you put a pallet of vodka in every crossroad coming across the border with Russia, I said, they'll be drunk by noon. I said, just scarf them up. I said, they don't have any direction. There's no direction.
Jeff, you were a great Army officer, but you wouldn't have made the best diplomat, I have to say.
That's true. That's true. When it comes to Russians and North Koreans and Red Chinese, you're right.
I am really, it's just stunning to me how on point you've been with that observation. Henry Shepke, the one advantage the Red Army had was numbers. They had an unlimited supply of men. Yep. Yeah. It was a numbers game.
And it's the same way it was with the Chinese during World War II. They're the ones that used their people. Chiang Kai-shek was another tyrant that lost all his troops and he didn't care. Right. He was worrying about Mao Zedong. He wasn't worrying about losing his own troops to the Japanese. And fortunately, they were willing to do that on both the Russian front and also the Chinese front, because they really tied down the Japanese army and the German army.
Wow, interesting stuff. Thank you, Jeff. Mm-hmm. Anybody else have anything they want to bring up? Because you know me, I've got stuff.
Jeff, it's Larry here. Is that because I'm an air guy. I don't know anything about ground forces. Is that the same thing that happened in Iraq? Since Iraq was trained by the Russians, And that's why we were able to go in there and just devastate the Iraqi army so
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, that's they were
They
trained by
lost-
the Russians, and they
Yeah.
used the Russian format and everything. We had a platoon. I think I told you this when I was over in Iraq with the 4th of the 9-man Choose out of 2nd Infantry, and we had a platoon of Iraqis with us, and we were training them up on American tactics, and they had their Russian equipment there and everything. And when they first got into the war in '91, I came home at that time for leave. And people asked me, they said, so what do you think? And I said, if the officers stick, it's going to be bloody. I said, if the officers stick, I said, if the officers leave, I said, we'll tear them up. Well, that's what happened. The officers left the field and all the Iraqis surrendered, and they lost everybody in 100 hours and all this stuff, but they didn't stick. And that's the way, and they were trained by the Russians. And they just, when we looked at the platoon of vehicles that we had assigned to our battalion over there in Iraq, I mean, they were pretty on the outside, but they were the dregs inside. I never seen such garbage looking vehicles, and the engines were terrible. And we had to put our own mechanics on them, not to get them squared away so they could, learn from us. But they had to learn everything all from square one, discipline. I remember the first formation with that platoon of Iraqis, they pulled out these cell phones and our sergeants were grabbing them from and throwing them over the wall. They said, give me those phones, you're not going to have those around here. And they just pitched them, but these guys had no discipline whatsoever.
Yeah, I studied a little air-to-air combat. Of course, it was the Russians had taught in Korea and a few other places, of course, Vietnam. And it was basically the same thing. I mean, it was all command and control from the ground. Whereas the Air Force military, as you know, is autonomous. I mean, you're made to think yourself and adapt to the situation, but they weren't. But anyway, hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks.
I was just going to say that at least it's back with the Soviets. When we were studying the Soviets and we got to talk to line crossers and things like that, the officers were the only ones that had the maps. In our army, everybody's got a map, and they know what's going on. In their army, they were secret documents, were the maps, and the officers had the maps.
That's fascinating. Before I get to Scott Masters, because I want him to share some stuff with us, conversations that he's had with his students and some of our veterans here. This is a really important issue, I think, that you're bringing up, Jeff and Larry. I think it reflects how the military reflects the character of the nation, and kind of maybe we're making the argument here that a military can only be as strong as there is kind of a trust in government, right? And a sense that the people who are going to be serving are really going to be serving on behalf of the country as a whole. Maybe I'm not saying that right, but in other words, the Soviet state, the Russian state doesn't seem to trust the men and women who are serving in uniform.
Well, I can just express from the Army side in the United States, from our services, we have a very strong chain of command. We have a lot of trust up and down the line. We have a lot of decentralization on decisions.
Yeah.
We turn it over to the NCOs and the soldiers to get the job done. We're right there with them doing everything. We don't ask our soldiers to do something we can't do ourselves. And we stick with them. And I think, just like any other service, I said, if you give the soldier a good mission and you protect his six, he'll go with you all day long.
Right. That's interesting. That's an important lesson. I have some questions, but I want to save them a little bit, just because I want to make sure that Scott Masters is able to talk about this conversation that he had with a couple wonderful characters, Mark there in the upper left and Sam Christie there in green. They met with your students, Scott?
Yeah, that was just last week. All of my classes are getting to the end of the 20th century now. So we're talking about the Cold War and Vietnam specifically. So in 3 different classes, Todd, you helped me a ton by introducing me to all these people. So we had a fantastic talk with Mark and Sam with that one group. And then there were a few other pictures I sent you of some
Yep.
of the other vets who visited as well.
Let me ask you, first of all, this is your classroom here in the background?
Yeah, that's it.
That looks like such a cool place to be. What's on the walls here?
I take photographs of every single class I've ever taught. So that whole back wall is covered with them.
Oh, that's so neat.
Mm.
Oh, what a like a clearly enriching environment. Okay, you'll recognize her, Diane. I recognize Diane and Bob Mizwa here. Wow.
Yeah, that one was just from about 2 weeks ago. That was the grade 10 class that day, which is actually a Canadian history class, but I told them Vietnam is a pretty big part of Canada's late 20th century history, and Bob and Diane did a great class for them.
What do your students know about the Vietnam War? I imagine very little, right? I mean, before they take your class.
For this group, very little, because the grade 10 is a Canadian history course, so we don't
Yeah.
talk about it in the same way. But for the other groups, they were grade 11 and 12, American history and world history. And, we talk about it from a totally different perspective there.
Okay. Oh, that's so great. And then finally, Nancy and Chris here.
Yeah, and I got to thank you for introducing me to Chris. He was a very fantastic speaker and very different point of view.
This is Chris Moore. He is a local TV personality, radio personality, also television producer, radio producer. He's also a Vietnam veteran, Vietnam Army veteran. And this is Nancy Donut Dolly from Vietnam.
Yeah, and she actually joined us from Alaska. She lives up in Alaska.
That's
so we were covering a big geographic space. And you can see that she once again wore her Donut Dolly uniform.
That's so great. So what was different about Chris's perspective that you thought was helpful for your students?
Well, I mean, he was able to talk about the reality of race in Vietnam and how that impacted him. And he had some pretty remarkable stories there and some really interesting photographs that just detailed his experience with fellow Black soldiers.
Yes. I mean, that is a whole story within a story of the Vietnam War, is the Black soldier experience in Vietnam when he served. And as I recall, Chris also has a remarkable story about race, not only him being on the receiving end of racism, but also coming to the realization, wait a minute, I'm using racist terms here to talk about the enemy.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
And he relayed that to the students really well. I thought that was a fantastic lesson for the kids to get.
That's so neat. That's so neat. Thank you, Scott. And maybe some of the people here might be willing to come into your classroom also.
Anybody who wants to is welcome. I've decided I really like this approach, and I'm going to keep doing it. It'll be too late for this school year, but next school year.
When does your school year end?
I think I have less days than Henry. I think he said 11 days. I think we're at 8.
What do you have planned for
not
the
that
summer?
I'm counting.
What do you have planned for the summer?
Absolutely nothing. I'm going to make my first trip to the United States in about 2.5 years. So I'll do that, I think, in July at some point. My sister lives in the US, so I haven't seen her for a long time.
Oh, that's great. So you'll have a little family reunion.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Oh gosh. Well, hey, enjoy your last week of school and certainly enjoy your time off if I don't get to talk to you before you enter the summer break. Yes, Chris Moore's brother is a Navy admiral. That's right, retired Navy admiral. Fascinating. I'm looking at some of the comments here. Don Nemchek. Don says, thank you, Jeff, for your insightful comments based on your experience. I wonder what that's exactly what I was thinking. The Chinese Army Command and Control. That's exactly what I was thinking also. Okay. Hey, do you guys know that it was Maritime Day yesterday? How do you celebrate Maritime Day? Chad, do you hear that? Nobody does anything for Maritime Day. Rick, Erisman, is that not sad?
I thought it was Armed Forces Day.
Well, Armed Forces Day was Saturday, I think.
Was Saturday Armed Forces? Okay.
Yeah. And Armed Forces Day apparently was created because that was the day that the Department of Defense was created by the National Defense Act of 1947. Oh, Chad says, how can we find out info about Scott's class? You could ask Scott. I think you should, that would be the best way to go, Chad.
Email. What's his email?
I'll go ahead and put it in the chat.
Okay. Hey, you asked about National Maritime Day. I can remember participating in a couple with Gerard.
Yeah.
Down in the Mon Valley.
Oh, I have too. I've given a talk there for Maritime Day. Maritime Day is the big holiday for the Merchant Marine. And early on in the Veterans Breakfast Club, there was, and I mean in like 2009, 2010, there was a group here raising money to create a World War II memorial down in Pittsburgh, downtown Pittsburgh, on the North Shore, and it is now built and it's magnificent. And part of the fundraising effort was selling a calendar, a World War II veteran calendar. And they would come to our breakfast and they would sell the calendar. And we just became, the Veterans Breakfast Club became a platform where these calendars would be sold regularly. I remember a merchant mariner veteran coming to our breakfast, looking at the calendar, charging up to me, and he was red in the face. He was so mad. And he said, your calendar, and even I tried to protest that it's not my calendar. Your calendar doesn't have Maritime Day on it. And he was so mad that Maritime Day was left off the calendar. He walked out. I never saw him again. He never came to a breakfast again. And so from that day on, I've remembered Maritime Day. Sometimes it takes somebody almost punching you out to remember Maritime Day. And it did get me curious. I gave a talk once for Maritime Day about where this date came from. And I don't know if there is a Maritime Day in like India. China has a Maritime Day. Canada probably has its own Maritime Day. Scott, do you remember when is Maritime Day for Canada?
Oh, I'd have to look that up. I'm actually, I don't know if I mentioned to you, but I have Nick DeVoe's logbook right now. So I'm visiting with all kinds of World War II vets, and I'm slated to see a merchant seaman later this week. So I'm going to make sure to look that up before I see him.
Yeah, and I just don't know if it's like May or you know, another, or what it's connected to, because here Maritime Day is May 22nd, and it's May 22nd because it is, get this, the date in 1819 that the SS Savannah crossed the Atlantic Ocean on steam power. It was the first time a ship had crossed the Atlantic Ocean on steam power. And Franklin Roosevelt, who was building up this merchant marine force here in the United States in the 1930s, wanted to make a big deal out of it. And so he chose and he promoted, and Congress approved, May 22nd to be National Maritime Day. Here is the Savannah. What a crazy story this is. This is two entrepreneurs from Connecticut had heard about Robert Fulton, had known about Robert Fulton and the steamboats that were going up the Hudson River from New York City to Albany. And they decided if you could do a steamboat, maybe you could do a steamship that will sail on the ocean. And so they got a big sailing vessel, a 3-masted sailing vessel, this thing, they bought it, and they retrofitted onto it a steam boiler, a huge boiler, and lots of, you know, copper, double hulled, whatever. And they put on, you can see this paddle there on the side. And this thing was way heavier than a normal ship. It was a Franken ship. It was, people came just to look at it because it was so strange looking. It was so heavy, it didn't have room for any cargo. It only had room for really expensive passengers, and only like 16 of them, staterooms. And so the idea was they were going to cross the Atlantic Ocean. They were going to sell these staterooms for a high price. Nobody, not one passenger signed up, not one. Not only that, but they had a hard time getting a crew to crew this thing because people were so freaked out by the danger of the huge retrofitted steam engine on it. That fire was a big danger in steamboats at the time. They thought, oh man, this thing will never cross. It has to be so loaded with coal, so loaded with wood, it'll never ever be able to cross the Atlantic Ocean without catching on fire. But it did. They slated for their journey, and here's Robert Fulton's steamboat, the first steamboat to go up the Hudson River. We in Pittsburgh think that it was first voyage was here in Pittsburgh to New Orleans, but it wasn't. It was in on the Hudson River first. And so they finally got this. They called the Savannah the steam coffin. They had a really hard time getting a crew. They finally did get a crew. They got them down to Savannah, Georgia, to leave on May 20th. They were about to leave, and then one of their crew members, maybe this sounds familiar, returned late to the ship, drunk, fell off the gangplank and drowned. And so they had to delay for a couple days. They finally leave May 22nd. They head into the Atlantic Ocean. And wouldn't you know, the prevailing winds are wonderful west to east. They don't even need the steam engine. They sail across the Atlantic Ocean. They turn the engine on for like a day out of the 29 days. And then they landed in Liverpool, England, and huge crowds celebrate them because it's the first steam crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. They never told the people that they hardly use the steam at all. And so the first thing that the owners of the ship did when they got to England was try to find a buyer for this financial sinkhole called the SS Savannah. I mean, this thing, they had poured so much money in this thing, they had made no money off of it. They could not find a buyer. Finally, they sold it for pennies on the dollar back in the United States. And the first thing the new owner did was took the steam engine out and used it as a regular sailing ship. So that's the story of Maritime Day. It's one of those things like, why are we celebrating? This is not one of the most glorious moments in maritime history. So that's my Maritime Day story. You know that I can't have one of these meetings without a little mini lecture. Leo West.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm revising that slideshow on Russia. I found a few more things I thought could be in it, and I started writing a script for it. And I thought, well, I better have some pictures of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to get rid of a lot of the writing that was on those slides, and that'll be in the script instead of being on the slide. There'll be some of it on there, but not a lot. And I think it'll make it a lot better.
And this is a deep dive into it's essentially the history of Russia to 1917, to the revolution.
Right.
Yeah. It is, I mean, it's a lot. You have a lot there, Leo. I don't know if it could take more. I mean, but it's such a complicated story. The history of Russia is really complicated because it's all completely intertwined with all the other national groups, ethnic groups who lived in the Eastern Europe. And then, there's new groups flooding in constantly. So yeah, it's
well, it's interesting how I got into studying Russia pretty much. And part of it came, I almost got fired.
You told me about this.
The third year I was teaching, I had taken a class and I picked up a set of rules for a Russian classroom. And I thought, hey, maybe I could do a simulation. So I got it together and I wrote up a lesson plan for it. I talked to the kids and they were all enthused. And so they made up passports for themselves in the Cyrillic alphabet. And they had name tags for themselves in Cyrillic alphabet. And everything was all set to go. And I come in on Monday morning, ready to start. And I was told, you can't do that. I said, what do you mean I can't do it? I said, we're all ready. Kids are all ready. No, you can't do it. The principals, or not the principal, but the superintendent's phone never stopped ringing over the weekend, because some kid, not even in my class, went home and told his mother that he had to wear a white shirt to school next week, every day. And that was not true. I mean, none of the kids had to do that. We did have a uniform, which was your shirt must be lighter than your trousers. And so
Leo, oh my God, what year was this? What year did you do this?
Probably 1960 or 1959, somewhere. It was
The
just a
height of
couple
the
years
Cold
after-
War.
Yeah, right after Sputnik.
Oh my gosh. So guys, okay, everyone, imagine this. Imagine Mr. West being your teacher, and it's 1959, the height of the Cold War. And he says, hey, we're going to run our class like a Soviet classroom. And the kid goes home and says, Mr. West is going to run our class like like they do in the Soviet Union. Oh, we have to have a passport. We have to have a uniform. Oh my, no kidding that parents freaked out.
No, that kid wasn't even in my class. That's the bad part. The kids that were in my class, they went home and told their parents, and one mother called me and she said, Mr. West, this is the first time I've never had trouble getting him to wear a necktie.
What a great thing, but you could imagine how that would cause, this crazy teacher is trying to indoctrinate us or something like that. There'd be a concern about
that's
that.
what it was. I mean, that's what the rumor got out. And fire him.
Wow. Amazing. Boy. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to, Mark Spirdigliosi. We spent time this weekend, and it was a wonderful time in your neck of the woods. And maybe I'll show some pictures. But one of the things that we talked about, Mark, was that when you went to Vietnam at age, you probably were you 19 when you went?
No, not yet.
You weren't yet 19. You were still 18.
Yes.
You spent your 19th birthday in Vietnam.
Yes.
You were a child.
I still am.
But did you understand the mission that you were there to fight communism?
Well, yeah, because my dad had that conversation with me. It wasn't that I studied that. I wish I had Leo West as a teacher back then, because maybe I would have understood more, about what I was about to get into. But, and my dad explained it with the domino effect. If Vietnam falls, then Laos falls, then Cambodia falls. So yeah, it was. But I was a kid until April 19th of 1969, or 1968, when I went into Asia, because I really didn't have any idea.
So you went into the Asia Valley for the first time, and your first experience of combat was April 19th, 1969. And after that day, did your understanding of the war change?
No, my understanding of survival changed. I still, I wasn't educated that moment. And I really didn't have a good grasp of what was going on with the war until, and it wasn't through the Stars and Stripes. It was through the El Tuna Mirror. My dad would send me copies of that, and I saw the anti-war sentiment growing throughout that time I was there. And the more I read from an unbiased source, not like the Stars and Stripes, the more I began to understand it. But it wasn't until much later, when I was there, that I began to grasp that. And but that April 19th date with Operation Delaware in Ashaw Valley was merely, the day that I went from being that high school kid to becoming a man, in my opinion. I never thought of myself as a man. I thought of myself as a boy, even at the time I was there, or when I first went there.
So you could really divide your life between the pre-April 19th, 1969 and post-April 19th, 1969.
Even as we prepared for it at Fort Polk, Louisiana, I still didn't have a grasp as to what I was about to endure. I mean that, and it was war games, basically, is what it seemed to be. And until you experience holding a rifle and shooting it in the direction of an enemy soldier, you can't, in my opinion, you can't grasp what that is. And I think it was Audie Murphy that said, the soldier never leaves the battlefield and the battlefield never leaves a soldier. And that's a true statement. That's the day that I entered the battlefield.
Rick asked, did Mark enlist? Mark, you were drafted.
I was drafted, and then thought maybe after I had been in for a while, Rick, that I wanted to make a career out of it, but I quickly learned that I didn't. So I did spend an extra year in there.
Well, Mark, you told me, Rick will find this entertaining, that you thought you'd be drafted, go into the Army, and you just tell the Army that you'd prefer not to go to Vietnam, you'd prefer to be stationed in Italy.
Oh, hell yeah. That's because I was Italian, and I could speak a little bit of Italian. So my dream sheet said, choices of service. Number one was going to be, somewhere outside of Fort Wayne, Detroit, because that's where I lived. And if I couldn't get there, I was going to Italy. And I see Jeff laughing really hard because I think he may have filled out one of those sheets at some. We call them dream sheets.
Dream sheets, that's right. So you're not joking. You truly put on your dream sheet Italy.
Yeah. Well, what the hell, Scott? I mean, or Todd? I mean, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's a good place." So
yeah. Oh sure, Mark. We'll take that into consideration. Jeff.
Yeah.
I was going to say, when I came into the Army, I wanted to go overseas. As soon as I came into the Army out of ROTC, I was going in for 4 years, and I was going to get out and save the world. And as soon as I did my first dream sheet, I had overseas on there. I had overseas on my dream sheet #1 for 13 years. And I finally got out of the States. I mean, I went to Korea, but I mean, for an accompanied tour, I finally got to Germany after 13 years. But I had it on my dream sheet anywhere outside the United States.
There was a guy I listened to one day, Scott or Todd, at a veterans breakfast meeting. He was going to beat the draft and get his selection, so he went down and joined. And he went through the list of MOS available, and they ended up having one there that said military intelligence. And he thought, I'm doing it. So he went into it. He ended up being a LERP. Just east of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, doing body counts up and down there all by himself. So his dream sheet was to get into military intelligence, but he never dreamed that it would be like that.
Robert McCormick. I'm going to ask you to unmute here.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hey, Mark, I went from Vietnam to Pisa, Italy for 18 months.
You're my hero.
It was talk about going from the ass to the penthouse. It was that. The first thing they tell you in Italy is do not wear your uniform off post, because the Communist Party was headquarters in Pisa. So they didn't want any look of American. So it was a very, very strange little 18 months, but it was very nice. I got to go to Florence a lot. I jokingly refer to, I can talk about sleazy bars in third world countries or the Italian Renaissance. I've been to both.
Bob Mizwa.
You know, amazing, Scott, or Todd, I went to Armor Officer Branch or Basic at Fort Knox, Kentucky in October '69. We're all sitting around, half of my class were military intelligence officers who had to pick a combat arms branch to train in. You know, their dream sheet was, I never thought I was going to be an armor officer. I thought MI was, no. They found out you either went to armor school, infantry school, or artillery school. But we all started looking at our orders, and there were these strange letters in all our orders, all capital letters, RVN. And a few of them had GR, and I think one had KO or something, KOR. Or RK or something like that.
The ROK.
And we're all
maybe,
wondering
yeah.
what these strange letters are. And then one guy's there, oh shit, we're all going to the Republic of Vietnam, and you guys with the GR, you're going to Germany. And one of the guys I knew, he had a twin brother. He got sent to Korea because his twin brother got sent to Vietnam. And so it was just weird. There we are in October '69. We are already pre-programmed. Because we were going to go through AOB. Then I went to like Fort Hood, Texas for my first active duty assignment, then to RVN, so the big computer, they had us picked out from day one where we're going, whether you liked it or not,
Bill Moran, did you get a dream sheet? I didn't realize that draftees got dream sheets in the 60s. Bill Moran, did you ever have the privilege of filling one of those out?
No, I don't remember. If I had a dream sheet, it probably would have been that I'd wake up and still be in high school when I got it. But no, that's beyond me. I don't remember that.
So, Bill, you were drafted, Bill, right?
Correct. Right.
And when you were drafted, were you under the illusion that you might go somewhere other than Vietnam?
No, Am I good? Okay.
Yep.
I figured I was going to go, but then I had quite a number of friends from when we graduated high school that had already gone. In fact, when I was going, a couple of them were coming back. So I think it was an automatic. I was in school. I didn't have to go. So I guess when I made the decision to drop out of school, I just assumed I was going to go to Vietnam. Bill, and it worked out that way.
So when you dropped out, did you knew that you were going to get drafted?
Right. Actually, myself and a friend of mine, we were going to community college. That's the year that it had opened up in Northside and Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And we were coming home on a bus to go into town to transfer to go home. We were talking about it. So we got off, we walked onto the federal building and upped our draft at that time. I mean, it was that simple. And then the crazy thing about it was that would have been in like January. And I see him April 1st and he says, hey, I got my draft notice today. And 2 weeks later, I got mine. It was all pre-programmed all the way down. We went to Fort Gordon, Georgia for basic. We both got a 2-week leave. We both went back to Fort Gordon for AIT. 2 weeks before me, he graduated. His whole unit went to Germany. 2 weeks later, my whole unit went to Vietnam. So it was all luck, however it was going to work out. So.
All luck. Jim Jameson, in the Air Force, did you get a dream sheet? I mean, you joined Air Force, was it 1960? Did you join? I'll put up, yeah, there you go.
I did not get a green sheet. I went from basic training to California. I spent 2 years there. And it was really like a 9-to-5 job, maybe 8 to 4:30. And the weekends were off. And I only recall one weekend of the 2 years in California that we were supposed to have a parade and a dust storm came through the desert and the general called it off and he never rescheduled it. And then I went to France for 3 years. but it was all before the real buildup of Vietnam.
And you didn't request any of this stuff. You
I
just
didn't request any of it.
you didn't request anything. You just went where they sent you.
I went where they sent me.
And you didn't pass the
I still haven't
reckoning.
qualified with a rifle.
You never qualified with a
No.
rifle.
No.
Amazing. Amazing to me.
A couple of comments from earlier. You know, you were talking about the destruction in Berlin after the war. And I think we're going to all relive that, except it's going to be in Ukraine.
Yeah. We're being reminded what total war is like.
I mean, it's going to be
or conventional, peer-to-peer war.
right.
Yep.
And supporting the conversation about there's no NCOs in the Russian army. How many Russian generals have been killed in Ukraine that have made the news? And the number's phenomenal.
Unbelievable. What, 13 generals maybe? Russian generals have been?
I think it was even higher than that.
It's
17.
unreal. How many?
17 is what I heard last.
17. Oh,
And I thought it was 17 or 18.
Yeah, 17 yesterday. Like it may be up to 18 or 19 today.
Oh, it could very, very well be. But before all of the time that I went was well before the time that most of the people that went to Vietnam were in the service.
right, right.
Because I was home in June of '65 to go to college.
Okay. And the buildup really began July 65. Don Nemchik. Hey, Don Nemchik, you have your hand up. I just want to make sure you get a chance to say your piece. Bob Mizwa.
Back to that dream sheet. Since I was our OTC, the only dream sheet we got was, okay, guys, what branch do you want? Do you want infantry, armor, artillery, AG, or what? And so, my first choice was armor because I said, well, they're going to probably make me into some combat officer, so I want to ride. And I got my first choice, so I'm not going to complain. But all these guys that were putting AG and MI and all transportation, what I say shit, I'm assigned to the infantry.
Larry
that was our dream sheet in our OTC.
Yeah, what I wanted to say, the dream sheet idea was no better for officers. We got a dream sheet, filled it out every time I was coming up for an assignment, never got the choice I wanted. I know it's getting late, but I got accepted for pilot training, but I got sent to nav school. As you know, I eventually made it into pilot training. After I went to Vietnam, then I put in an assignment. I wanted to go to Holland. At the Air Force Base in Holland, I got sent to England. While I was in England, I got accepted for pilot training. I wanted to go to Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. I got sent to Lubbock, Texas. After Lubbock, Texas, I wanted to fly an F-4s somewhere in the Southwest. I got sent to North Carolina. While I was in North Carolina, I wanted to again go into a training outfit someplace in the States. I got sent to Alaska. After Alaska, I wanted to fly F-15s. I got sent to Tucson to fly A-10s. While I was in Tucson, I wanted a staff assignment so I could get promoted. Instead, I was sent over to Korea to fly A-10s. So I never got my first, I never got even my second choice. So
yeah.
It didn't work for enlisted. It didn't work for JROTC, as Robert said, it didn't work for me either. So we weren't any better. A dream sheet was exactly what it was called, a dream sheet. It didn't mean shit.
We've kind of come to the end of our program, and there's something I want to talk next time we have an open conversation, or maybe we should schedule some kind of program on this. I'm hearing more and more about the plan to remake the United States Marine Corps. And I know it's controversial, and I know it's super contentious, and I know it's probably political. But it's I was thinking of getting a couple people who have written about this and who know the issue to come on and talk to us about this, because here we have this war going on right now, Ukraine and Russia, and it's revelatory in some sense, because it's the the first European war that we've had for 30 years, and it's a kind of a peer-on-peer conventional warfare. And what's striking is that this has not been decisive. This has not been decisive in the war, and this has not been decisive in the war. In other words, the main platforms on the ground, in the air, and at sea have not been the weapons that have really made a difference. This has been, and this is the Neptune missile that sunk that Russian ship, the command ship, the flagship, the cruiser. And so the Marine Corps is considering kind of, moving really toward these anti-platform weapons, like these smaller, more mobile weapons. And I know Brad, as a retired Marine colonel, I don't know, you probably have an opinion on this, would love to get you involved in this conversation, but this is something that I think would be interesting to talk about, not because one side's right and one side's wrong, but because it illuminates how war is changing and the kind of considerations that we have to have for what the Marine Corps will look like in the future. Brad, did you have something to say?
Well, we could talk for an hour on it, but it is very contentious. It's a hot topic. It's something that the media has got a hold of, and you can read articles about it. We don't know everything that's being discussed in the classified area. Yeah. But when you look at the world and the world platform, it is scary. China was in the news today, for example, and Taiwan. And what's being looked at is not how to fight the last war, but looking at what the war will look like in the future. Yep. We've made that mistake. The military has, not only the United States, but others. So, but it is controversial, it's risky, and it's debatable. And yep. that's what the one of the gifts of the military is, civilian oversight over the military. And that is in play here also. So it's a great topic, and I'm a spectator of great interest. Yep. And of experience dealing with some of these issues, but it'd be worthy for different viewpoints to hear it. It is, the Marine Corps has been the force in readiness, America's 911 force, etc. We've been a war fighting force, and we've adapted, as you know, over the years. And I think the process is ongoing.
I read a very good short article by Elliot Ackerman, who's a Marine veteran, combat Marine veteran, Purple Heart Silver Star recipient, wrote a really good summary of what this debate is taking place in the Marine Corps. It's in the Atlantic. A whole age of warfare sank with the Moskva, and a fierce debate is raging in the Marine Corps about what comes next. I do recommend it. I'm going to try to get Elliot Ackerman on our program if he could.
I would say one thing real quick, Todd. Don't base your decisions on the Russians. I'll tell you right now. Don't just because, okay, those things happen. That happened to Russians.
Yes. Exactly. That may not be a reflection, right, of where warfare is going. It may be the Russian dysfunction. Scott Masters, happy Victoria Day.
Thank you very much.
And I only know that because you messaged me that it's Victoria Day.
I just think of it as it's a 3-day weekend.
Okay, I'm going to guess that Victoria Day is Queen Victoria's birthday.
I'm going to guess that you're probably right. I'm actually not entirely sure.
Okay.
I just know it's a 3-day weekend. We call it May 2-4 weekend, and there's also 24 cans and a case of beer. It works out.
And you watch the hockey playoffs, and it's a great weekend. Perfect weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, thank you so much. Yeah, Bob Miswell, you have the last word.
Just a quick question to the Air Force guys like Ben Wright and Larry Guggens. Remember that 40-mile Russian convoy that came out of the north? I'm sitting there and I'm looking, give me a dozen A-10 Warthogs,
Yep.
and I guarantee you 95% of those vehicles would be gone in an hour. What do you think about that, Ben?
Yep.
Well, actually, Larry flew the A-10. He could tell you a lot more than I can. But yeah, that's what the A-10 was made to do. It's a tank buster for Europe.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm going, what kind of tactics are the Russians using?
And then the
You know,
worst thing, Bob, was when they dug them in. When they dug in the tanks, I said, this is done.
Yeah.
You don't dig in tanks.
No,
I
it's,
know it's getting late, Todd, but obviously the A-10 would have done great, just like it did in Iraq. However, it's not just, you don't just take an airplane, pull it apart, ship it over there and say, there you go. You know, you got to learn to fly it. You got to learn to, you got to have it. Maintenance, loading, a 30mm gun, weapons, training. It just does it. I will say it sounds really good to be a good story.
Yeah.
But it couldn't happen. Not quick enough. How long would it? So you guys do deployments. I mean, it's 6 months would be astronomical if they could get it done in 6 months. You know, so it looked good on paper, but wasn't going to happen. You're not going to just give it to the Ukrainians and say, hey, go fly this airplane and see what you can do.
So the Ukrainian Air Force does not have anything equivalent like to an A-10.
No.
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
No. But one,
They have
one
all
like-
Soviet era leftovers.
Yeah.
Are they MiG-18s what the Ukrainians had? You know, it's the same one that the Polish armies were going to give them.
Well, the MiG-29s, they wanted the MiG-29s, but and I don't know how trained up they are in the MiG-29.
Well, they're very trained up in them. That's why they wanted them.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, and wanted the parts because that's what they have is leftover Soviet equipment from Soviet occupation. That's what they've got. So yeah, they're very familiar with that aircraft.
Well, one of the last things on the Russians was when I saw them going to call up everybody over 40 years of age, and they were going to call up the reserves. I said, oh, this is it. This is really going to make a big difference here now. I said, their reserves, the Russian reserves, let me just tell you this, our hunters have more training than the Russian reserves do. So,
Jeff, I'm going to recommend that you are the Victory Day speaker for the Russian program next year. I think that would be a hoot and a holler.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. This is a wonderful conversation. Let's do it again next month. We'll be back tomorrow with Greatest Generation Live. Happy Victoria Day. Have a very good May 23rd evening, everybody. Take care. Good night.